Perfect. Maybe I'll do the recording right this time. So welcome to the ADSA Education Special Interest Group call. We're going to be speaking with three individuals from three different universities today about capstone programs and capstone projects and such. So what I will do is I'll let the speakers introduce themselves as they come up. And then we should have plenty of time towards the end of the session for discussion. We'll hold all of the questions till the end, till after everybody's had a chance to speak. And if you have a question that comes up and you want to capture it, feel free to just throw it into the Zoom group chat window in Zoom, and we'll make sure to capture it there. And if you are not speaking, please go ahead and mute your audio. It looks like everybody's muted now, just so we don't get any cross traffic. So we're going to start with Matt Bellis, move to Ajay Anand, and then to Phil Bourne, and then on to discussion. So Matt, why don't you take control of the machine?
Okay, it says it's host disabled, participant sharing, I'm getting.
Of course it is. Let me fix that for you.
No worries.
Okay.
All right, I got it.
Perfect.
All right, let me find the right window to share. Uh-oh. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Yep.
I don't know why it's not finding this. Oh, there we go. All right. Is the screen being shared?
It is. We can see some slides.
Okay, great. Is it cutting off anything, or is it cutting off the bottom? It almost looks like on mine it might be, but
it looks a little wonky, but I think it's fine. I think we can see all the info.
All right, how about this? I'm going to not do full screen,
okay.
Just to make sure everybody sees it. So Steve, thanks very much for organizing this group chat and for inviting me. So I am at Siena College. I'll explain where that is in just a moment. I'm going to talk about our very nascent data science program and our discussions that we've started about capstone projects. And I look forward actually to hearing what everybody else is doing, because we're trying to figure this out ourselves. So for those of you that are not familiar with Siena, we are an undergraduate-only institution in upstate New York. We're located just outside of Albany. So we're about a 2.5-hour train ride just north of New York City. We have about 3,000 students. It's about equally divided between our School of Liberal Arts, our School of Business, and our School of Science. And I think one of our strengths is that all of these different schools are actually quite strong for an undergraduate-only institution. So again, I'd like you to keep in mind that we only have bachelor's degrees. There's a few business master's programs, but we don't have graduate students. A number of us have been doing data science and data science adjacent programs for quite some time. So about a few years ago, this started, and about 2 years ago, we launched our data science major as well as a minor at Siena. We have 2 tracks. There's an applied track and a pure track. The pure track delves deeper into some of the back-end computational skills, as well as some of the real underlying mathematical theory. And this is still separate from our business analytics track major, which is in the School of Business. The data science program is multidisciplinary. It is faculty from math and CS and physics, environmental science, and even philosophy that sit on a steering committee. And our goal from the beginning is throughout the program to use as much real data as possible. And this is all fueled by, prior to actually having this major, we had in some sense what I would think of as a stealth data science program, where we would have a number of physics or math majors who actually went on to jobs or master's programs in data science with, let's say, their physics degree. So we're very excited about this program. It's really just starting. I don't think we even have any graduated majors yet. So this issue of capstones and these related efforts are going to become more relevant going forward. So What I'm going to describe is a number of independent studies and a couple of other capstones, not in the data science program, but let's say in physics or environmental science, that will give you a sense of what we're going to be trying to do more formally going forward. So the one that's actually yielded quite a number of projects is for about the past 4 years, I and a couple of other faculty at Siena have been involved with a group located in Albany called CARES. And they receive funding from the federal government to attack the problem of homelessness. They store data in a federally mandated schema called HMIS, the Homelessness Management Data System. And this has yielded a number of projects for students, including 2 physics capstone projects. We have a JOS paper, for those of you that are familiar with JOS, the Journal of Open Source Software. We presented a poster at the Bloomberg Data Exchange for Good. And we provided some feedback to the CARES themselves. They're managing information for 23 counties in New York State. And this is an ongoing effort, but it's been a great training ground for our students. I'll provide a couple of comments about this more at the end. We've also had what I would call these lightning in a bottle experiences with sports analytics. About 3 years ago, I reached out to a company called SportVU, and they do a lot of player tracking data, particularly basketball. And so they used to partner with academic institutions. They provided us with a bunch of tracking data for players. We actually put together a paper that was accepted to a preliminary stage, but not presented at the MIT Sloan Conference. This led to some students actually being accepted to the official NBA hackathon. And so we started to accumulate these data sets from these different groups that other students could play with, not just tracking data, but let's say TV viewership. SportVU, however, is no longer associated with the NBA. It's a company called Second Spectrum, I think, and they do not give out data to academic institutions. So we'd like to do more sports analytics, but we're unsure of where to get the data these days. In our environmental science department, they actually teach a course on GIS. We had a student that was pursuing a data science minor, and she worked with the faculty members a 2-semester independent study on distribution patterns of community-supported agriculture in New York State. This was a poster that was presented in a environmental workshop. And it's great that we have this real cross-pollination between the different departments that we're very excited about. So those are some things that have been done. It spurred a lot of discussion about, well, what do we do going forward? And what we'd like to do is try to take advantage of some of the stuff that's taking place at Siena. So it's very possible, maybe, that some of you have heard of Siena on some summary of poll results, whether it's politics or some other social issues. We have something called the Siena College Research Institute, and they have partnered with the New York Times and a couple of other large-scale organizations to do polling. We have a Division I men's and women's basketball team that we have not yet taken advantage of, maybe some partnerships with them. And then last summer, and I cannot show this data because it's all internal, we actually had a student do an internship with our admissions department. And they looked at the data instead of shipping it out to some third party. We actually looked at the data to understand different trends and where students were applying or not applying. And this has yielded some insight into who our competitors are. And we've talked about the idea of these internships perhaps becoming part of a capstone project. Again, I mentioned this idea of sports analytics as a Division I program. It's a pretty big activity in the area and on campus. We're not exactly sure how the details of this, but it's something we're doing because we have a lot of students coming in that are actually interested in the idea of sports analytics. You know, over the last 5 years, there's been an explosion in this, a bunch of blogs everywhere, as well as this Sloan Analytics Conference. And then the last thing I'll end on with just a couple of slides is Siena in our library has something called the Digital Scholarship Center. And what they've done is they've done a lot of scanning of old artwork, as well as, let's say, old Siena newspapers. And they are constantly taking in paper products from around the school and scanning it. And this past fall, in a freshman class that an exploratory data analytics and visualization class, we had all of this data from a hunting and fishing club from like the 1920s and 1930s. And so we had about 800 pages of this that was all scanned in. And so we wanted to do some exploratory data analysis. We crowdsourced it amongst the entire class. And then, so we had all this like data like this. We could not do any optical character recognition, but again, we had the students define some schema and input all this data to some massive spreadsheet. And then we had the students look at like frequency, you know, what month were letters written in, who wrote the most letters. This was a hunting and fishing club, so did the documents talk about fish, which was kind of fun. And so we realized we've got this resource on campus that, even though this was in a freshman class, could provide more detailed analysis for capstone projects. So I'll close up by just saying we're very excited about our data science program. We've also had discussions with the School of Liberal Arts about working with some people in history or English, political science, about maybe finding projects that are the data science majors could do. We've been seeking out real problems. So these are real data sets. Students get to learn about data munging, the limitations of data. One thing we found with the homelessness data is actually there's a lot you cannot do with the data because of the limitations of how it's taken. And we've also talked about this idea of do no harm. There are some projects that are just very difficult to do with undergrads in 1 year. And so if you partner with some external community member, we have to be very careful we do not promise too much. Yes, we're doing it for free, but we cannot tell them, hey, we're going to provide you a solution in a year, and then find out that all we've done is really start looking at the data, which is a little bit what happened with the homelessness data, and we had to back up on. So I'm going to stop there. I look forward to the discussion as hearing from my other two colleagues, and I will stop the screen share there.
Great, thank you, Matt. That was wonderful. Ajay, do you want to take over?
Sure, yeah, just a moment, I'll start sharing. Okay. Is everyone able to see that? Okay, great. Great, awesome. Hello, everyone. Again, thanks, Steve, so much for the invitation. Very glad to be able to present what we have been doing with our capstone and practicum projects here at the University of Rochester. So let me introduce myself quickly. So I'm Ajay Anand. I'm the Deputy Director for the Gergen Institute for Data Science here at UFR. Been in this role for a little over 3 years. And primarily, I've been involved in the education activities for the Institute. And one of my core teaching responsibilities has been to direct this capstone course, in addition to another more sort of lecture-driven course. So it's been a great journey. When I took over the capstone initiative, it was quite nascent. The student cohort was small as well. So it's been an interesting journey, sort of growing the capstone as we kind of deal with increased enrollments as well. Broadly, the motivation for our capstone was really to bring in an experiential learning component to complement our more traditional courses. So here at Rochester, we have both the undergraduate data science program as well as a graduate at the master's level. So you know, the first bullet here just lists the traditional courses we have that's sort of classic for a data science curriculum. And you know, the opportunity that the capstone brings in is truly a project-based course. So at the undergraduate level, it's a capstone, and at the graduate level, we refer to it as the practicum. The interesting point is, you know, like some of our courses here at UFR, the capstone and practicum are actually cross-listed. So essentially, in a given offering of this capstone, you would have undergraduate students as well as graduate students participate in the course at the same time. So clearly, as probably there's a story with other data science institutes as well, our undergraduate and graduate cohort has increased over the last few years. And this in turn provides you know, interesting opportunities as well as challenges for the capstone program. So I'll refer to that in a moment. So we started off with about 20 students in our undergraduate program. We'll be graduating about 60 in this coming year. And similarly, we've seen modest growth in our graduate program as well. The structure of the master's program also influences sort of how the capstone is offered. So our master's program has a time duration where students could graduate either within a year or they could take 1.5 years to graduate. So the Capstone experience, essentially, we promote that or position that as an opportunity where students can work on real-world data sets. These are all data sets that are provided by sponsoring organizations. And essentially, the goal is to complement the coursework in the BA, BS, and the MS program. It's also an opportunity. We position it as a team-based learning experience. So, you know, again, the team sizes have grown. Typically, we have anywhere between 2 to 4 students participating in a project at the same time. So the goal has been to have each team in a class be assigned a given project. Sometimes I've seen that you know, sometimes having a sort of a competitive spirit helps as well. So maybe having 1 or more teams tackle the same problem, you know, lends itself to some creative solutions as well. Since we sort of ramped up this program, we have offered close to 60 projects from about 35 sponsors. Typically, it's 1 or 2 projects coming from a sponsor. So going into a semester, we engage with the sponsor, and the sponsors come from a variety of domains. Our largest component has been from industry, followed by academic sponsors and departments within the UFR. So going into a semester, we are essentially, through the discussion with the sponsor, we are asking for an accessible data set, a data set that, you know, that can be easily shared with students as well. And also the second requirement for a sponsor to engage is, you know, coming up with a problem statement that's relevant to the domain and something that they see potential business value in. Also, we you know, encourage a commitment from the sponsor to be able to meet with the teams at least bi-weekly. So this ensures sort of a continual engagement throughout the course. So given the structure of our master's program and our undergraduate program, the Capstone course essentially is 1 semester long. It's offered twice a year, so it's both in the fall and the spring, given the timing that the students are looking to graduate in this program. And it's, again, a required course. So what you see at the bottom of the slide is sort of our journey through the course. So this has, of course, evolved over the last few semesters. We see this also as an opportunity to bring students, sort of introduce students and kind of get them more familiar with project management. So given that this is sort of an external facing course, you know, having students go through a kind of an activity in project management and implementing some of those concepts has made a difference in sort of the progress of these projects, if you will. So it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to sort of get students situated and assigned to the projects. And then it's over a period of 8 weeks or 9 weeks that the students are kind of working hand in glove with the sponsors, coming up with the solutions. So, you know, this is a message I'll probably touch upon later in the presentation as well. So it's a pretty compressed project duration. And that in turn, you know, lends itself to some interesting both opportunities and challenges as well. So what's the structure? So basically each team that comprises of 3 or 4 students is advised by a faculty member. Typically these have been our instructional faculty. So over the past few semesters, it's mainly been the instructional faculty who are directly involved with the course, who are serving as mentors. And so, you know, as we think further about how we scale the course and so forth, you know, this sort of faculty engagement question also comes up. We do encourage the students to meet as, you know, periodically the sponsor. That really is the win-win as we see it, and the sponsors have appreciated that very much. And especially this is very important at the beginning of the project in our experience. This is where the students are trying to get up to speed on the specific domain knowledge. You know, when the project, the data comes from various domains, it's you know, it's not practical for anyone other than the sponsor to have that innate domain knowledge and kind of communicate that to the students. So at a given point in a semester, we would have anywhere between 10 to 12 projects, depending on the class size and the team size. And typically, just to have a right balance between the bandwidth that a given sponsor has working with students, you know, the sponsor is typically sponsoring maybe 1 or 2 projects in a semester. Again, just like how Matt mentioned at Siena, we do not have any sponsorship fee. So the hope is this is a win-win for both the sponsor and the students in terms of the experience the students are getting. So what does a typical semester output look like? So we've had, as I mentioned, we have engaged with a variety of sponsors, all the way from small companies, startups, to large companies, faculty within departments in the university, and also administrative departments who are looking for just some input on how to analyze some data that they have been accumulating or gathering over the years. With our industry sponsors, the main ask has been, showing a proof of concept. So these are typically situations where the company has some data that's been collected, but maybe not have the manpower internally to analyze that. And so they're looking for feasibility to take this to the next level. So typically these start up maybe as back burner projects in the company. And the win-win here is the students are able to provide a helping hand to help the company move it to the next level. So in these cases, the sponsors are pretty forthright. They come up with some performance goals, what they're looking for. And also, what's been a great experience for students is they open up the kind of the code framework. So they like students to actually develop in the code framework that they are using internally. And that helps them sort of ramp up or internalize the code that the students are giving them. Beyond that, our experience has been that a publishable product is possible by the end of the semester. But typically it's involved, having a kind of a next level of engagement or a further engagement where the student team or parts of the student team continue to work with the sponsor and sort of, just wrap it up beyond the semester in order to get to the point where it's submitted a journal and kind of follow through. It's been a good, the Capstone course is unique because, you can't think of this in other traditional courses, but the Capstone course lends itself to some good publicity, both for the university and the sponsors, and also Data Science Institute. And also there have been a few examples where, a company is interested in working with the university. It starts off at a kind of a low point of entry with the capstone, and it has then resulted in maybe some more organic university industry collaborations. So these are sort of the diverse outputs that we have seen over the past few semesters in the capstone. Along the way, we have had some good learnings as well. We learned early on that having students sort of interface externally and work with external stakeholders, just having more checkpoints or more components in the course around project management and communication has been helpful. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that the sponsor are receiving deliverables that are related to what they set out to ask for. So we have incorporated some more official checkpoints, if you will. So students are required to create a project goals. They want to, we ask them to submit project reports, and also just to help with the deliverables at the end of the semester, have them document all of their code in a repository. Given the semester-long duration, which essentially boils down to like 8 to 9 weeks of actual project time, we learned early on while identifying sponsors and sort of identifying projects from these sponsors that right-sizing the project scope is very important. So, there's not too much opportunity for sort of iterations, especially let's say if the data is not appropriate or if the analysis kind of leads to a dead end. So in the interest of the students getting a kind of a beneficial experience, quite some effort goes leading into the semester to sort of identify the right set of projects. Also, we also learned that marketing this capstone course is an effort. It's time consuming sometimes, but it pays off as well. So we have explored multiple channels to do that. So we document all the projects. We from time to time we look for we reference testimonials from sponsors and students, and also this has been helpful in sort of any kind of industry engagement event. So talking about this capstone presentation, and also this is a way to solicit additional sponsors as well for the course. Some of the maybe learnings more than challenges, if you will, would be ideally, I think a one semester option is not optimal. I think I know some institutes offer this over 2 semesters. And I think over a 2-semester format, maybe it provides more opportunity to have more iterations that can guarantee more of a successful or a result-oriented end goal. But given the structure of our program, at the moment, the 1-semester option is the most viable. As a result of it being 1 semester long, it does require the sponsor to come in with a well-defined problem statement. So this is unlike a research question. You know, it has to have kind of the start point and end point sort of more clearly defined. And also, you know, the more engagement there is between the sponsor and the students throughout the course, and maybe even beyond the course, that more than often guarantees a kind of a publishable output. It's been very important for, in our opinion, an experience that students engage with the sponsor really closely early on to acquire the domain knowledge. And, you know, the data quality also is important, especially given the duration of the semester. As we look ahead, you know, we are constantly thinking about what the scale up of this capstone experience would look like. You know, mostly in the case of, you know, when we work with multiple sponsors, it's not always the case that, you know, all projects are equal. So, you know, every student would like to do predictive analytics, deep learning, or machine learning. That's sort of their ask. But, you know, not every sponsor is set up to be able to offer data that lends itself to that. So, a case in point is not every sponsor has data that's well labeled and, you know, lends itself to a supervised learning problem, for example. So at the same time, you know, we're trying to balance the expectations of the sponsor in terms of what's feasible, and also, you know, the faculty in terms of mentoring as well. The working with companies, of course, IP issues, IP agreements have to be worked out. This again is a diverse discussion. Many sponsors have take the effort to sort of distill their data. Or they have, you know, depending on how mature their data science teams are, they could have data sets that are more readily accessible for students, in which case the IP burden and the kind of confidentiality agreement burden is less. But in other cases, you know, these have to be worked out, and those at times have been time consuming. And at that point, you start to wonder, you know, what's the justification for that kind of effort when the duration of the experience is a semester long, for example. So I think if I would summarize it, you know, there have been a lot of learnings, a lot of great opportunities, a lot of good outputs. It's really helped with relationship building. Many of our alumni have gone on to work for some of these companies as internships or full-time. But at the same time, I think if I would identify one challenge, or one challenge as we look forward, is around scaling up the capstone experience. So I think that concludes the presentation, and look forward to discussion and the Q&A.
Great, thank you. That was wonderful. So if you want to unshare, and then we'll hand things over to Phil.
Sure, yeah. Just a moment. There we go.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, it's a miracle, modern miracle. All right, so thanks for the opportunity to tell you a little about what we're up to. I thought I'd present this in the form of a SWOT analysis to give you a sense of where we're at. And actually, a number of the things that Ajay has said has resonated very strongly, and I won't dwell on them. I'll just try and amplify them a bit. Let me just give you a little context, first of all. So we formed a school last September, October. It's only the 12th time in the university's history that a school's been formed. I'm sure Thomas Jefferson, who founded the university, is turning in his grave, but there you go. I came about 3 years ago, but the institute that predates the school is when the capstone started. And these are capstones that are based around an 11-month master's program. And I think that's a characteristic that perhaps differentiates a bit from what we've heard before. It also feeds into what Ajay was saying, at least about the duration of the program, and I'll get to that in a second. There's a whole series of other things going on, and I won't dwell on that, but I would say that our Masters in Data Science is both residential and online. And I don't mean a bunch of Zoom lectures. I mean developed as a formal collaboration with Noodle partners to develop a real, integrated online experience, which of course turns out to be gold now in this era of COVID. But of course, running capstones online generates some other challenges, which I'll get to in a second. So the context, I said 11 months, 2 semesters plus summer. We've been doing this, the 7th year is about to start. The online is just, the online itself is in the 2nd year, but the students rotate in at different times. So the capstones, they're really just starting. We have a theoretical course, Practice and Applications, that runs in parallel with the whole capstone experience. That experience runs for about 9 to 10 months of the 11-month program. And so the theoretical underpinnings are very integrated with the practice that's actually going on in the capstone. Like the other projects, really, it's teams of 3 to 4 folks, typically, with a mentor who's from our school and a sponsor, which could be public or private. We'll get to that a bit more. Things start off as the students arrive with a pitch day. So we have a collection of projects. I should say that Michaela already asked this question, but the labor of getting this together is quite significant. We have an associate director for research development, Claudia Schultz, who's awesome. She pulls this whole program together. She facilitates and helps bring in projects. Those projects get pitched on pitch day. The students, based on those pitches, determine the projects they're most interested in. We run a little profile matching algorithm to match them to the projects, and they typically get their first or second choice within the program. There's bi-weekly meetings between the mentors and the sponsor and the students. There's some professional development and other things that go on as well during that time. And all of this accumulates at the end of the academic year in an IEEE SIG conference paper and presentation. So these, I'd say these are relatively low-key publications, but these materials are published. And under the IEEE banner, there's a whole issue around open science and that, which we can get into, which drives me nuts. But the students clearly really relish the idea of producing something of this magnitude. All this is to say is that research areas cover everything we do within the University of Virginia, which of course is every imaginable research field. And the thing I really like about the school and the institute before it is we're completely independent. We award master's degrees from the institute prior and now from the school. So we're not beholden to any other entity that's likely to lead to a certain bias in the areas which we cover through these capstone projects. So that to me is a really exciting aspect. So what are the strengths? I'd say, first of all, the capstone is actually the core of our pedagogy and our philosophy and anything else you want to really relate to. I think how we market the school, how we consider the school's reputation. Because in the end of the day, it seems to us that is what we should be delivering, is the ability for students to do data science in real world settings. So in other words, it's an experiential learning experience. To our other speakers, Matt and Ajay already talked about, that this is team science. I think it leads also, I don't think this was mentioned, just-in-time skill building, because that's really, let's face it, that's what we all pretty much do all the time. So they actually get a good dose of that. They certainly develop their project management skills, and they learn how better to collaborate and communicate. So all of that, is very positive. The weaknesses in the SWOT analysis is that it's human resource intensive, and that as you scale, currently we have about 70 students in the online program and about 60 residential. We'll see what happens this year, of course, but that was last year. We've actually, as that scaled up, we actually have to figure out how we operate this differently. And so we don't have individual mentors now meet with each group. So if you imagine you've got 3 or 4 students, let's just say there's 80 students, that's 20 projects. You need 20 mentors we now have grouped projects in accordance with similar domain. So a single mentor will handle 2 or 3 capstones, and they will meet together. That's the only way we could actually figure out how to scale this and keep what we regard as a really successful program. And that, don't take my word for it, the student, I'm sure you wouldn't. The students actually, you know, the surveys of the outgoing students say this is the best part of their whole learning experience. You know, so I could say other weaknesses, people put forward ridiculous projects that clearly are, you know, are not really what we want our data science students to be doing. And sometimes that's tricky because we have strategic relationships with these folks, either as a private sector partner or as another research group in the university, for example. You don't want to really be telling them their project doesn't really qualify when you're trying to build up other kinds of strategic relationships with them. Often people don't want to pay. That's been a bit of a weakness. We charge $5K for non-profit and internal projects and $15K for commercial enterprises. But really that is twofold. So they have a bit of skin in the game, although one of our big customers, for example, clients is Capital One. I don't think 15K makes a lot of difference to them. But we use that money to actually send the students on treks as part of their project. And that's, you know, really a lot of fun. We did a project with the Met in New York before all this COVID came down. So the students got to go on that. They were doing a lot of scanning and character feature recognition in images from the Met. Well, we heard a bit about this, but NDAs and IP take time. So it's really important that these projects roll over. So in other words, they're not just one-offs, that they roll over year after year, where the NDA and the IP agreements essentially can be maintained in place. Of course, IRB approvals can cause delays, as we know. I think, so what about the opportunities? So we can engage, we have now begun to engage alumni in projects. You know, we're now 6 years old, so we don't have a deep alumni base, but we have an alumni base, and they want to keep. This is actually an amazing characteristics of the University of Virginia, which I have to say, my years at Columbia and UC San Diego didn't exist in the same way. But the alumni just love UVA, and they keep coming back. They give, and they want to give projects as well and be involved. So. They're now engaged in us, starting to engage in projects. You know, it's very useful to use this as to build trust. So you start off with a capstone. If that works out well, the client, whoever that is happy. That builds a sense of trust in a small way with a small project that doesn't cost very much. And that leads to new and bigger and better things. And we have seen that. I won't go into the details, but we have a very significant endowment, which really started in part because of these kind of relationships. And I mentioned the seminar model, which it means grouping capstones together to make better use of labor. We could talk more about that. What are the threats? Even now, I think we're kind of worried about the number of students that we have, not that they're melting away, that we're actually potentially getting more. The online is starting to really pick up, and you know, being able to scale this to hundreds of students, that's, if that were to happen, is potentially a problem. And we may not allow ourselves to grow like that, but those are decisions that are yet to be made. I think there's a sense that the students get assigned to projects occasionally and they don't see the value to the marketplace, or in the context that they want to be able to go to a job interview and say, I did, you know, deep learning on this particular set of financial data, therefore give me a job at Capital One. You know, they want that degree of integration that they can say at their interview. And if they're working on a project that doesn't necessarily give them that street cred, they feel a bit like they've been disenfranchised. If the mentors are not engaged, it's really not good. And we've weaned those out over the last few years so that we generally get mentors who are really engaged. And I think everybody benefits from that. So this is, well, sorry, I say mentors, but the mentors are engaged. I meant to say clients. So the other side of the equation. So our mentors are generally people on our faculty or at least adjuncts. And so they're engaged. If the client is not particularly engaged, then that's a problem. And then if we don't have projects in the kind of domains that students want to work in, that hasn't been a problem so far, but it could in the future. And then the threat, which we don't really know yet, is how well online capstones are going to work. Given how everything else is working on Zoom, I say I'd be cautiously optimistic that things won't go so badly. So that's really all I have. So let me stop sharing and go from there.
That was great. Thank you, all three of you, for all that great information. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat here, and I can maybe read those out as a starting point. So Michaela asks, who manages these student teams? I think we have one answer in the chat for that, but so who's responsible if there's a problem with interactions between students and partners? And does this fall to faculty members or someone else? Anybody can take that.
So I would just say that to start the ball rolling here, that we have a single person who's responsible for capstones. She is the point of contact and takes the responsibility for this. And then our faculty members are pretty much, most of them are engaged in these projects. So, but it's that having someone who administering this whole business is quite intensive, and it really takes someone to really devote a significant amount of time to it. So that single point of contact is, I think, really important.
Yeah, so at Siena, we do not have, unfortunately, that single point of contact. Part of it is because we're a newer program, but part of it is because we're just spread very thin, as I'm sure we all are. And so in a generous way, you could say these capstone projects sometimes emerge organically from faculty interests, right? So I'm in the physics department. There are programs that are, projects and interests of mine. If you're less generous, you could say it's a real random walk process, and these projects wander around quite a bit. What we see sometimes is there are 1 to 2 faculty that have these ideas and these partnerships, maybe with other people on campus, and then they start accumulating more of the students, so the load is not balanced appropriately. And so one of the things we've talked about going forward is how to load balance the faculty engagement so it's a better experience for everybody.
Matt, do you have more internal projects versus ones that come from industry? It sounded like at UVA and is it Rochester? That
so
have more external ones.
So far, our only external projects have been with nonprofits. So there's some food banks in the area. There's the homelessness group in the area. We have had some initial contacts with New York State because we're located just outside of Albany. That's a government more so than industry. We're very close to General Electric and a few other places, but we have not yet really forged these industry relationships, but this is a goal of ours moving forward. It's primarily been nonprofits, in part because Siena College is a Franciscan college, and so there's this embedded idea of mission and service to the community. And this attracts up a lot of our students, and it's something we've tried to promote, this idea of data science for good for the community.
I would say, just to add from the UVA perspective, that I probably, because it's a master's program, 80 or 90% of the students actually go off into the private sector, sometimes for nonprofits, but also for for-profits. And so they're looking for that experience with those companies. So I think we therefore have more engagement with the private sector. than we do, say, with internally. However, as data science, suddenly every faculty member is starting to realize that data science is important to them, even if they don't quite know what it is. You know, there becomes a lot of interest from internal, and that's where these sort of trite projects arise. You know, it's, you know, I have this spreadsheet, can you do something with it, kind of, you know, that's not what we're trying to necessarily, so picking the projects is important. But I'd say the other thing I would just mention in this context is we have an advisory board, and that advisory board has been incredible. So we have the president and CEO of Verisk Analytics, which is a Fortune 500 company. We also have the CIO of Capital One. So they have provided, you know, they are very keen. So the capstones create the workforce pipeline as well. And so it's this bi-directional, you know, they're interested in sponsoring these projects so that they have access to our students, and they try them out. I wouldn't say that the offer rate is that high from capstones. I don't know what it is. I'd say, if I had to guess, I'd say 15, maybe 20% tops of the students get offered a job by the client that they're working on their capstone. It's probably more like 15%, but there is some of that at least.
Great. Ajay, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to add to that, I can resonate with what Phil mentioned. That's sort of our hit rate as well, about 20%. But about the engagement, we are probably skewed compared to Matt in terms of more industry engagement, and then we are starting to build on the internal university department engagement. So university departments are realizing they're sitting on data and they can use some help, and then that's where you know, they look to our, and that's great. Especially we've had some successful internal projects with our advising office. So they're looking at student outcomes, the libraries, and also, of course, we have a large medical center just across the street. So a lot of clinical projects as well. Regarding industry, what I've observed, just yes, it does take time to hone in on the right size the project, as I called it. And to a large extent, I've seen it also relies on how mature data science is within the institution, within that sponsor. So if they have like a data science group, you know, they have been playing around with many of these same types of solutions, they are much better prepared to offer the right type of data set that lends itself for some rigorous data science projects. The other extreme is an Excel spreadsheet, and they ask you to clean the data or prepare the data for analysis.
That's great. Thank you all. Any other questions from the attendees, or should I go to my pile of questions here? All right, here comes my pile of questions. So I'm curious about technology transfer. So you have students working on these projects, and presumably they're going to be handing over results or possibly things like code to the partner. And what does that conversation look like with the partners about what tools should be used and how the code or whatever it is needs to be documented when it gets handed over?
Sure.
I can't remember how it worked at other institutions, but where I am now at UVA, the students own the IP. So it's really up to the students to determine what they want to do with the output of the project. And frankly, hardly any of them think about it twice. They just sign it over. And we've had one or two, you know, incidents where that's taken more time. And we've actually had issues where with the data aspect. In fact, that turns out to be a critical thing that I don't think's been mentioned. But you know, you get a client and they're gung-ho about this project. Sorry, it's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's a really important point. And the data, forgetting about whether it's proprietary or not, that they claim the data will be there when the students start, and it's not. And that really delays the projects, and it's really ups, you know, it's really bad for the students. And you know, and then this is another aspect. The other aspect of the data is quite often even when the data comes, of course, it's what we all know, it's crap. So they spend an inordinate amount of time cleansing the data. And, you know, and if you're doing this in a one semester, that to me would seem to be a bit of a problem. On the other hand, you know, so they spend probably a majority of the first semester just getting to the point where they can actually do something useful with the data.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and our theoretical practice of data science course is geared up to, you know, really exploiting the tools that actually allow for data cleansing and, you know, wrangling and whatever you want to call it.
So yeah, here I've seen kind of sponsors also having this, you know, kind of documenting how they would like the output of a project. So in recent semesters, we've had companies that use a cloud-based platform. They open like managed workflows, code workflows in those platforms, and have the students kind of you know, kind of develop the code in there, check in and check out. So that makes it a much more seamless environment for the sponsor when they're trying to use some of these deliverables later. And regarding the technology transfer, yes, this has been an ongoing discussion with the university, sort of drawing this line between an educational project and a research project. So finally, we now have a kind of a standalone capstone agreement. So that is much more favorable now to the company in terms of giving them the kind of the rights to the output from the project in terms of code and IP rights.
Great.
So the one thing I'll comment on is this long-term relationship we've established with this community partner in homelessness. They have some people there that do minimal data analysis. I don't want to disparage them, but they're trained to work with a particular data set and produce a few summary reports. We've talked about the idea of actually looking for funding to actually train them to use Python and R and some of these other tools. Similarly, the big output that we got from this study that we did was not any real data tool results, but actually learning that the data input was flawed. And so we've been working with our nursing department to develop actually a training training exercises for the workers in the various shelters, so we can get more consistent data. But again, since they're a nonprofit, we have minimal funds for this. And so right now there's an effort to maybe acquire some outside funding that could go towards training of the input data, less so than just software tools. So this is an ancillary benefit of the data analysis exercise.
Steve, could I ask a question that sort of follows on from that in a way?
Yeah, please.
I'm interested if the others or anyone on the call actually, it's about data reuse. So it's about the idea that you have these capstones 1 year and so it's building upon itself. So it's really the notion of data sharing within that project, but then beyond that, you're effectively sharing it with the next generation of capstone students. And, you know, whether folks are putting in place any kind of infrastructure to support that kind of thing. We have the Center for Open Science here in Charlottesville. So, you know, we're using to some extent open software framework and things. But you know, it's not totally satisfactory, and I'm just wondering what people think about that in general, actually, as to what if there are solutions out there that people are using.
I have nothing really to add because our projects are very much driven by the individual faculty. So it falls upon each of us to decide whether or not it makes sense to carry a project over or whether it ends at some point. So unfortunately right now, this challenge you say of kind of reuse or archiving or storing the data is not something that we've really even tackled, to be honest with you, as embarrassing as that is to say.
And many times in our discussion with sponsors, the data reuse comes up. So, you know, while companies are very much okay with, you know, the results being published and being communicated, the data is what they want to keep close to the chest. So I don't have an instance where a sponsor would be comfortable allowing data reuse without their involvement in a subsequent capstone project. but this is where I wonder if there's opportunity for this community to harness some data sets that are maybe real world, and then kind of set up an infrastructure or maybe move towards that. I don't know if that would
Actually,
have some
AJ's,
interest.
your response made me realize that I needed a clarification from Phil. So when you say the data reuse for another subsequent year, would the idea be that sponsor is still involved in those projects though, right? Or are you saying no, that you're looking for an agreement where that data could be reused for a different project and the sponsor is no longer involved?
Yeah, it depends on the sponsor and the project and the type of data. It could go either way. I mean, we're trying to build a school around open science as much as we can. It seems ironic to me that data science exists because of open data. So we should be contributing as much back to the pool as we can. I don't think we're at the point of doing a particularly good job with that right now. But it's just an embedded part of our psyche, including promotion and tenure and all these kinds of things. It's really part of our, of what's expected of our team. But so there could be cases where the data is used in the subsequent year by a completely different entity, provided, of course, the originators of that data are okay with that. So it really depends very much.
Great, thank you. So I'm just looking at the clock here and we're right up at the top of the hour. So I'd like to thank our speakers for sharing info about their capstone programs. I'd love to link in the Zoom chat there for the document, which has some notes and follow-up information if you would like to follow up. And then also a link here for a little exit survey that you could take to let us know how this session went and if you have any ideas for other sessions for this special interest group or otherwise. But thank you again, everyone. It's been great to have this discussion, and I look forward to the next discussion.
And I hope we can pick up on AJ's idea of maybe brainstorming this problem of data sharing that Phil brought up and that we're all trying to tackle.
Yeah,
great.
absolutely.
Yeah, I came across some healthcare data sets that were acquired. It was actually NIH funded, and it's hosted at Brigham and Women's. It's a public data set for healthcare. It's real world ICU data. So, those are, yeah, it would be great to have such data sets in other domains and see how it can be put together. But there's a one-off. Steve, a logistical question. I saw the other speaker shared the slides. I didn't get a chance to put my link here. It's right now just sitting on my laptop.
Would you just want to email it to me and I'll drop it into that notes document
Okay,
and share that around? Yep.
Great, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone.